In the dim flicker of a lantern's glow, deep within the underbelly of a forgotten southern plantation, a boy no older than 12 knelt beside a makeshift table of rough-hewn wood. His small hands, scarred from endless labor in the cotton fields, trembled as he traced invisible lines across the cold, pale flesh laid out before him. It was the year 1847, and the air hung heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the stifling humidity of a Georgia summer night. Whispers among the enslaved called this place the House of Shadows, where the master's curiosity twisted into something far darker than mere oversight. The boy, known only as Elias to those who dared speak his name, fixed his gaze on the form, not with fear, but with a clarity that pierced the darkness like a forbidden light. In that moment, as his memory unfolded the hidden contours of the human body, he etched details that no free mind of his time could fathom. 67 organs, mapped in silence, born from horrors that the official ledgers would never record. Before we go further, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here, we dig up secrets buried by official history and give voice to the silenced. The plantation sprawled across the rolling hills of a remote Georgia county, a vast empire of white bowls and iron chains, ruled by Elias Masterson, a man whose wealth was built on the unbroken backs of over 200 souls. Masterson was no ordinary planter. He fancied himself a gentleman scholar, importing dusty tomes from Europe on anatomy and natural philosophy. His library, tucked away in the grand house overlooking the fields, brimmed with illustrations of the body, veins like rivers, hearts as mechanical pumps. But knowledge, for a man like him, was never content to stay on the page. It demanded experimentation, and in the shadowed corners of his domain, where the law's gaze seldom fell, he forged pacts with his own twisted ambitions. Elias had arrived at the plantation as a child of 8, torn from a family fragmented by the auction block in Charleston. His mother, a woman of quiet resilience named Lila, had been selected for what the overseers euphemistically called the breeding program, a systematic effort to bolster the workforce through coerced unions, masked as divine providence. Lila's eyes, deep pools of unspoken grief, had been the last familiar sight Elias remembered before the chains rattled him northward. On the plantation, he was assigned to the kitchens at first, scrubbing pots until his fingers bled, but his unusual gift soon caught the master's eye. Elias possessed a memory that bordered on the uncanny, a eidetic recall that painted pictures in his mind with surgical precision. A single glance at a diagram, and he could recite its every line, a fleeting view of the fields, and he could map the exact placement of every tool shed. It began innocently enough, or so the whispers went. Masterson, intrigued by tales from the quarters about the boy's sharp mind, summoned Elias to the library one fog-shrouded evening. "Recite the bones of the arm," the master commanded, his voice laced with the false benevolence of a benefactor. Elias, standing rigid in the opulent room that smelled of leather and pipe smoke, complied without hesitation. Humerus, radius, ulna, the delicate carpals unfolding like secrets. The master's laughter echoed, but there was a hunger in his eyes, a spark that would ignite the nightmare to come. From that night, Elias became a fixture in the house, his duties shifting from drudgery to something far more insidious. He was tasked with memorizing the master's books, sketching maps of the estate's irrigation systems, even predicting crop yields from patterns in the soil. But beneath the surface of these privileges lurked a deeper purpose, one tied to the forbidden experiments that the plantation's elite guarded like a family heirloom. The community of the enslaved moved through their days in a rhythm of enforced silence, the crack of the whip a constant underscore to their labors. Families were shattered not just by sales, but by the selective pairings orchestrated in the dead of night. Programs designed to produce stronger field hands, all under the guise of paternal care. Rumors swirled in the hushed gatherings around the cook fires. The master had made pacts with neighboring planters, exchanging stock to refine their human herds, much like one might breed horses. Disappearances were commonplace, workers vanishing into the swamps after infractions, their fates chalked up to fever or flight in the sparse records. Elias's mother, Lila, had been one such victim of the program's cruelty. After birthing a daughter who didn't survive the harsh winter, she was reassigned, her spirit breaking under the weight of abuses that left invisible scars. Elias overheard the women's murmurs, "They take what's theirs, and we bury the pain deeper than any grave." Yet Elias's role pulled him into the heart of the darkness. As months turned to years, Masterson's fascination grew. The library sessions evolved into late-night dissections in a concealed outbuilding, what the enslaved called the whisper room. Bodies, those of the deceased from the fields, or worse, the punished who met untimely ends, were brought there under cover of darkness. No records marked these acts. The plantation's ledgers spoke only of natural attrition. Elias, with his unerring memory, was made to observe, to catalogue. "Describe it," Masterson would urge, his scalpel glinting as it parted flesh. The boy, his voice steady despite the bile rising in his throat, would recount the liver's lobes, the intestine's coiled labyrinth, the heart's chambers pulsing with echoes of stolen lives. 67 structures in all, from the spleen's hidden curve to the brain's forbidden folds. Details that predated any machine. Born from a child's coerced genius amid tragedy, the silence that followed was profound, woven into the fabric of the community. Elders warned against speaking of the whisper room, fearing reprisals that could doom entire cabins. Even as the Civil War loomed on the horizon, the plantation's secrets remained entombed, the master's notes locked away in ciphered journals. Elias, now a young man hardened by the weight of what he'd seen, carried the maps in his mind like a curse, a blueprint of humanity's fragility, etched by cruelty. Decades would pass before the first cracks appeared in this veil of forgetfulness. In the 1920s, a descendant rummaging through an abandoned attic would uncover faded sketches, unsigned but unmistakable. But for now, in the sweltering nights of 1847, the truth slumbered, waiting for a voice to awaken it. As the lantern dimmed that fateful evening, Elias closed his eyes, committing the latest horror to memory. Outside, the fields whispered of unrest, of spirits that refused to be silenced. Little did he know, his recollections would one day challenge the very foundations of medical history, revealing not just the body's mysteries, but the soul's enduring scars. The years following Elias's first summons to the library blurred into a haze of enforced vigilance, where the plantation's rhythms masked the undercurrents of dread. By 1850, the boy had grown into a wiry youth of 15, his frame lean from scant rations, but his mind a vault of unyielding precision. The fields stretched endlessly under the relentless sun, cotton bolls bursting like wounds against the earth, while the enslaved toiled in silence, their songs reduced to murmurs lest they draw the overseer's lash. Masterson's domain, once a symbol of agrarian prosperity, had become a labyrinth of concealed intents, where the grand house loomed like a sentinel over the quarters, clusters of weathered cabins that housed fractured families, bound by chains, both visible and invisible. Elias's days now straddled two worlds, the blistering labor of the fields at dawn, where he hoed rows alongside men whose backs bore the faint ridges of past punishments, and the nocturnal summons to the whisper room. The master, ever the self-proclaimed savant, had expanded his pursuits, drawing in a cadre of like-minded elites from neighboring estates. These gatherings, cloaked as scholarly salons, unfolded in the outbuilding's dim confines, lit by tallow candles that cast elongated shadows across walls, stained with the residue of forgotten labors. Masterson would preside, his voice a measured drawl, quoting from forbidden texts smuggled past censors, works on phrenology and vitalism that posited the body as a machine to be dissected and perfected. The Negro form, he once intoned to his guests, a cluster of portly planters in starched collars, holds untapped symmetries ripe for revelation. It was during these sessions that Elias's gift became both salvation and shackle. Forced to stand at the periphery, his eyes compelled to absorb the proceedings, he catalogued the revelations with a detachment born of survival. The forms laid out were those who had succumbed to the plantation's rigors, field hands claimed by exhaustion, mothers from the breeding program whose spirits had finally fled their burdens. No epitaphs marked their passing. The ledgers noted only diminished numbers, attributions to cholera, or the peculiar institution's natural tolls. Elias, under the master's probing gaze, would recite the pancreas's elusive nestle, the kidneys' mirrored fortresses filtering life's tainted stream, 67 in total, each organ a testament to the body's intricate defiance against the cruelties inflicted upon it. His voice, steady as a metronome, filled the room, while inside, memories of his mother Lila twisted like thorns. Her final days in the program, reassigned to pairings that stripped away dignity, leaving only echoes of pleas whispered in the night. The breeding program, that insidious cornerstone of the estate's economy, wove through every corner of life like kudzu choking the soil. Masterson, in league with a network of planters spanning the county, orchestrated these unions with the cold calculus of livestock breeders. Women like Lila were selected for their vitality, paired not by affection, but by edicts issued from the big house, pacts sealed over brandy in smoke-filled parlors where laughter masked the human cost. Children born of these arrangements were tallied as assets, their futures predestined for the fields or, in rare cases like Elias's, repurposed for the master's whims. Whispers in the quarters spoke of sisters vanishing into isolation cabins, emerging changed, their eyes hollowed by abuses veiled as necessity. Elias had glimpsed it once, through a chink in the wall, his mother's form, bent under the weight of enforced compliance, her resilience fraying like threadbare cloth. She had passed soon after, her death logged as complications, but Elias's memory preserved the truth, the program's relentless grind, eroding souls until only silence remained. This silence was the plantation's true enforcer, a communal pact forged in fear. Elders gathered at dusk, their voices low as they shared fragments of lore, tales of earlier disappearances, bodies consigned to unmarked pits in the swamp's embrace, far from prying eyes. The community, bound by blood and bondage, internalized the hush, knowing that to voice the horrors invited collective ruin. Even the overseers, complicit in the veil, turned blind eyes to the whisper room's traffic, their loyalties bought with shares of the harvest. Masterson's ciphered journals, locked in an iron chest, chronicled these experiments not as atrocities, but as progress, sketches of organs annotated with pseudo-scientific musings, crediting Elias's recollections without acknowledgement of the boy who provided them. The official records of the county, penned by sympathetic clerks, omitted any trace, painting the plantation as a model of enlightened management. Yet cracks in this facade began to form, subtle as the first autumn frost. Elias, navigating the dual existence, found solace in fleeting connections, a shared glance with an elder field hand named Josiah, whose scarred hands told stories of rebellions quelled in blood. Josiah, in hushed tones during water breaks, would murmur of ancestral memories, how similar pacts had dotted the South, elites trading secrets to evade the moral reckonings of distant abolitionists. "They bury us deep," Josiah said once, his eyes on the horizon. but the roots run longer than their chains. Elias absorbed these words, layering them atop his anatomical maps, forging an internal archive that transcended the flesh. His mother's locket, a tarnished keepsake hidden in his pallet, became a talisman. Inside a faded curl of her hair, a reminder of the human threads the master sought to unravel. As the 1850s dawned, tensions simmered beneath the plantation's veneer. Whispers of unrest filtered from the wider world, speeches in the north decrying the peculiar institution, fugitives slipping northward along hidden rails. Masterson, sensing the winds of change, redoubled his efforts, drawing Elias deeper into the fold. Late one evening, as thunder rumbled over the fields, the master unveiled a new directive: to commit the mappings to paper under his supervision. Elias's hand, guided by an unerring eye, traced the contours, the lungs' delicate branches, the spine's armored column, each line a silent indictment. But in the margins of his mind, Elias began to encode more: the faces of the lost, the program's hidden tolls, the pacts that bound the elite in mutual deception. Decades later, in the quiet aftermath of emancipation, these etchings would surface, pieced together by descendants sifting through attics cluttered with relics. A great-niece of Josiah in 1923 would stumble upon a bundle of yellowed pages in an abandoned mill. The ink faded, but the details uncannily precise, predating the crude X-rays of the era, let alone the magnetic resonances of the future. Historians would puzzle over the source, attributing it to some anonymous prodigy, unaware of the enslaved boy's coerced genius. For now, though, in the stifling nights of the plantation, Elias endured, his memory a beacon in the gloom, illuminating paths to truths long interred. The whisper room's shadows lengthened, but so did the boy's resolve, a quiet persistence against the tide of forgetting. The humid veil of another Georgia summer clung to the plantation like a shroud, turning the air thick and unyielding as the decade edged toward its turbulent midpoint. By 1852, Elias had become a ghost in his own life, slipping between the relentless cadence of the fields and the clandestine rituals of the whisper room, with the stealth of one who knew the cost of being seen. The cotton harvest swelled under the sun's merciless glare, bowls splitting open to reveal their fibrous hearts, much like the secrets the master pried from the bodies in his hidden domain. Over 200 souls still bent to the estate's demands, their labors fueling a prosperity that masked the rot beneath. Families pieced together and torn apart by the breeding program's unyielding grip, where women were commodities in a cycle of coerced endurance, their quiet agonies folded into the daily grind like threads in a loom. Masterson's ambitions had metastasized, drawing him into a web of correspondences with physicians from as far as Philadelphia, men who cloaked their inquiries in the language of scientific inquiry. Letters arrived in sealed packets, postmarked with the discretion of conspirators, requesting details on specimens that the official post would never acknowledge. The master, ever the curator of his macabre collection, relied on Elias more than ever. The boy, now 17, his features sharpened by years of vigilance, stood as the uncredited scribe, his memory a living atlas that rendered paper redundant. In the whisper room, amid the acrid scent of preserving salts and the faint lingering echo of labored breaths, Elias would absorb the layouts. The gallbladder's bitter reservoir, the adrenal glands perched like vigilant sentinels atop the kidneys. 67 organs, each a puzzle piece in the master's grand delusion of mastery over flesh, catalogued not for healing, but for the perverse thrill of unveiling what God had concealed. The breeding program loomed larger in these years, its mechanisms grinding with mechanical indifference. Masterson, in pacts forged with a syndicate of county elites, lawyers and merchants who profited from the trade, refined their approaches, selecting pairings based on whispers of heredity gleaned from the very dissections Elias witnessed. Women from the quarters were isolated in remote cabins, their compliance enforced by threats that rippled through the community like aftershocks. Elias's recollections of his mother Lila haunted him here. He had pieced together her final months from fragments overheard in the kitchens, reassignments that left her spirit fractured, her body a vessel in a scheme that valued output over humanity. One evening, as he trudged back from the fields, he passed such a cabin, its door barred from within by fear alone. A muffled sob escaped, carrying the weight of generations silenced, and Elias paused, his hand brushing the rough timber. In that instant, his mind overlaid the anatomical maps with faces, the uterus's hidden cradle, twisted now by abuses that no ledger would confess. The community's silence had deepened into a chasm, a collective vow, etched by survival. Around the flickering cook fires at dusk, elders like Josiah exchanged glances heavy with unspoken histories, tales of kin who had vanished into the swamps after resisting the program's demands, their absences attributed to desertion in the sparse plantation rolls. Josiah, his once strong frame bowed by decades of toil, became Elias's quiet anchor, sharing fragments during stolen moments by the well. They weave their lies into the law. Josiah murmured one twilight, his voice barely rising above the cicada's chorus. Pacts signed in blood, hid in attics and county vaults, waiting for the world to forget. Elias nodded, committing the words to his internal archive, where they intertwined with the organ mappings, like veins feeding a hidden heart. The overseers, bought with bonuses from the cotton yields, enforced this hush with selective blindness, turning away from the midnight carts rumbling toward the whisper room, laden with forms shrouded in burlap. Yet, beneath this enforced oblivion, seeds of persistence took root. Elias began to test the boundaries of his role, subtly altering his recitations during sessions, omitting a valve here, blurring a lobe there, not in rebellion, but in a quiet reclamation of agency. Masterson, absorbed in his notations, seldom noticed, his focus drifting to broader schemes, proposals for a clandestine society of Southern savants, dedicated to advancing the peculiar institution through such forbidden knowledge. The ciphered journals swelled, pages filled with Elias's coerced insights, annotated with the master's grandiose theories on racial physiognomy. No credit was given to the source. Elias was merely the tool, his humanity as expendable as the specimens he described. Outside these walls, the plantation's facade cracked under external pressures, rumors of the compromise of 1850 filtering through traveling peddlers, stirring murmurs of change that the elites dismissed as northern agitation. One storm-lashed night in late autumn, as lightning fractured the sky, Masterson summoned Elias to the library for a revelation of his own making. The room, with its shelves groaning under leather-bound volumes, felt smaller than ever, the air charged with the ozone of impending fracture. "You've mapped the machine?" the master declared, sliding a fresh ledger across the desk, its pages pristine and expectant. "Now, encode it for posterity, our posterity." Elias's fingers, calloused from hoe and quill alike, hesitated over the inkwell. For the first time, he committed lines to paper under direct gaze, the esophagus's serpentine path, the bladder's resilient sac. But in the subtle flourishes of his script, he wove encodings of his own, initials of the lost, like Lila's, concealed in the curves of ducts and vessels. It was a defiance born of the memory that had both blessed and burdened him, a thread of resistance against the tide of erasure. The weight of these acts pressed upon Elias like the plantation's unyielding soil. In the quarters, Josiah's health waned, his stories growing fainter. Yet he urged the young man to hold fast. Memory's the chain they can't break. It'll outlast their ink. As the year waned, disappearances mounted. Another woman from the program, her fate whispered as a fall into the river, though Elias's sharp eyes had seen the cart's path toward the whisper room. The silence held, but Elias's mind became a burgeoning testament. 67 organs intertwined with the scars of the enslaved, a map not just of bodies, but of stolen lives persisting against oblivion. Decades hence, in the shadowed archives of a county courthouse unearthed in 1947, fragments of these ledgers would surface, pieced by a diligent historian descending from Josiah's line. The precision would stun, predating diagnostic wonders by a century. Yet the human cost, the programs, the pacts, the buried truths would emerge only in halting confessions from aging descendants. For now, in the flickering lamplight of 1852, Elias endured, his crazy recall a flickering flame in the encroaching dark, illuminating the resilience that no master could fully extinguish. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you hear this story. I want to know how far these silenced reports reach. The encroaching shadows of 1853 draped the plantation in a perpetual twilight, where the cotton fields, now barren in the off-season, stood as skeletal reminders of the endless cycle of extraction. Elias, at 18, had become an indispensable spectre, his presence woven into the fabric of Masterson's obsessions like a thread too fine to sever. The grand house, with its whitewashed columns mocking the mud-churned paths of the quarters, echoed with the muffled deliberations of men who styled themselves as pioneers of progress. Yet beneath this veneer, the air thickened with the unspoken dread of revelations that could unravel empires built on human frailty. The breeding program, that relentless engine of the estate's future, hummed with renewed fervor as Masterson and his allies, planters from adjoining counties bound by oaths whispered over maps of bloodlines, sought to optimize their holdings in anticipation of turbulent times. Women were summoned to the isolation cabins under the cover of routine inspections, their pairings decreed not by hearts, but by ledgers assessing strength and yield, leaving trails of quiet despair that seeped into the communal well like invisible poison. Elias's nights in the whisper room had evolved into a ritual of calculated horror, the outbuilding's walls now reinforced with fresh timber to muffle the proceedings from wandering ears. Masterson, his beard streaked with premature grey from ceaseless scheming, had procured rudimentary instruments from a discreet supplier in Savannah. Probes and clamps etched with the insignia of European apothecaries, tools meant for healing but repurposed in this den of forbidden inquiry. The forms arrived shrouded, often those who had faltered under the breeding program's demands. A young woman whose body had rebelled against the enforced burdens, her passing noted in the plantation rolls as melancholy. Elias, positioned in the corner like a living etching board, absorbed the details with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. The thyroid's delicate butterfly wings, the prostate's concealed sentinel, each addition to his mental catalogue of 67 structures layered atop the previous, forming a comprehensive atlas that the master coveted as his legacy. "Your mind is a gift from Providence," Masterson would murmur, his eyes gleaming with possessive pride, oblivious to the chains that had forged it. But Elias's gift was no divine favor. It was a survival forged in the fires of loss. Memories of Lila intruded during these sessions, unbidden overlays on the cold flesh before him. Her form, once vibrant in the kitchen's steam, reduced by the program's cruelties to a shadow haunting the edges of his vision. He recalled fragments pieced from the women's hushed circles, how she had been selected for multiple reassignments, her resilience tested until it shattered, leaving her to whisper prayers to ancestors whose names the ledgers had long erased. The pacts among the elites extended this torment, with Masterson trading insights from the dissections, notes on reproductive fortitude gleaned from the very victims, to secure alliances that fortified their mutual silences. Letters exchanged under pseudonyms detailed these exchanges, hidden in false-bottom drawers, promising advancements that masked the human calculus beneath. Elias, privy to the recitations, internalized not just the anatomy, but the betrayal. How lawyers in the county seat drafted deeds that obscured ownership of the enhanced offspring, ensuring the crimes dissolved into the fog of official forgetfulness. The community's veil of silence had calcified, a protective carapace against the encroaching whispers of change from the outside world. The compromise's fragile peace filtered through circuit riders and peddlers, igniting furtive discussions in the quarters under the moon's indifferent gaze. Josiah, his frame now frail as weathered oak, gathered the elders by the smokehouse, his voice a rasp, weaving tales of resistance from earlier eras. Uprisings quelled in the night, bodies consigned to pochos in the swamp's moor, their stories surviving only in oral threads passed like contraband. "The Master's maps ain't just of flesh," Josiah confided to Elias one fog-bound dawn as they mended fences near the river's edge. "They're chains on our blood, but memory, that's the river they can't dam." Elias absorbed this, his eidetic recall expanding to encompass these narratives. The ovaries paired mysteries, twisted now by the program's abuses, intertwined with accounts of women who had feigned compliance only to sabotage the pairings in subtle ways. Herbs slipped into rations, delays that bought fleeting moments of autonomy. Tensions within the plantation simmered like a pot left too long on the fire. Overseers, sensing Masterson's distractions, grew harsher in the fields, their lashes falling on those who lingered in conversation, enforcing the hush that preserved the status quo. Disappearances mounted, chalked up to flight or affliction, but Elias's sharp eyes traced the patterns, carts vanishing toward the whisper room after dark, returning empty under starlight. One such night, as a late frost nipped the air, a field hand named Mira, strong-armed from the weaving shed, recently pulled into the breeding rotations, succumbed to what the Master called vital failure. In the room's chill, Elias catalogued her form, the spleen's vigilant filter, scarred by unseen strains, the fallopian tube's fragile conduits now emblematic of the pact's reach. As he recited, a tremor in his voice betrayed the fracture. Masterson paused, his scalpel hovering, before dismissing it as fatigue. But in Elias's mind, Mira joined Leela, a constellation of the lost, their essences encoded in the margins of his atlas. Masterson's network deepened, drawing in a visiting surgeon from New Orleans, a man with a satchel of ether and ambitions to collaborate on a treatise. The gathering that followed was the most audacious yet. The whisper room transformed into a makeshift theater of inquiry. Under the surgeon's guidance, they explored preservation techniques, Elias's recitations guiding the incisions, the meninges' protective veils around the brain, a structure the Master deemed key to understanding inherent capacities. The elite's laughter punctuated the air, toasts raised to futures unburdened by moral qualms. Their pact solidified in shared notations that would later vanish into private vaults. Elias, enduring the hours, felt the weight of complicity settle heavier, yet it fueled a quiet resolve. In stolen moments, he began sketching fragments on scraps from the kitchens, rough outlines of organs laced with symbols from Josiah's stories hidden beneath his palette like seeds awaiting soil. As spring thawed the earth, external pressures mounted. Fugitive tales reached the quarters via a sympathetic miller, speaking of routes northward, where freedom's breath grew tangible. Masterson, alerted by spies in town, tightened his grip, assigning Elias to monitor the fields for signs of unrest. The young man's dual sight, scanning for escapees while mentally archiving the whispers, became a bridge between worlds. One evening, as he returned from patrol, he overheard the master in the library, voice raised in argument with a courier. Disputes over the syndicate's shares, hints of fractures in the elite's facade. The ciphered journals, now voluminous, held the keys. Elias's mappings, annotated with theories on enhancing the stock through selective programs, all veiled in pseudoscience to evade scrutiny. In the hush of his cabin, Elias pondered Josiah's fading words, persistence as the ultimate defiance. The 67 organs, once mere structures, now pulsed with the plantation's buried pulse, the breeding pack's toll, the silences that choked communities, the disappearances etched in memory alone. Decades would pass before a descendant in 1958 unearthed a water-stained bundle from a flooded root cellar, the sketches revealing anatomical wonders that baffled experts, their origins traced to a forgotten Georgia estate. Confessions from aging kin would follow, peeling back layers of complicity. For now, in the budding warmth of 1853, Elias carried the atlas within, a crazy beacon against the encroaching night, where every recollection was a step toward unveiling the truths interred in the soil. The whisper room called again, but so did the distant call of revelation, faint yet unyielding. The relentless churn of 1854 settled over the plantation like dust from a passing storm, coating everything in a fine, inescapable grit that mirrored the erosion of hope in the quarters. Elias, now 19, moved through his days with the measured gait of one who had learned to balance visibility and shadow, his lithe form a testament to the lean economies of survival. The cotton had been planted anew, tender shoots pushing through the red clay under the watchful eyes of overseers, whose vigilance had sharpened with whispers of sectional strife echoing from distant newspapers. Masterson's estate, still a bastion of enforced order amid the county's sprawling network of similar domains, pulsed with the undercurrents of its hidden machinery, the breeding program, now a finely tuned apparatus of control, dictating pairings that fractured kinships and forged new ones in secrecy. Women from the fields were drawn into rotations with clinical detachment, their isolations justified as measures for health and productivity, leaving behind cabins that echoed with the absence of voices once raised in song. Elias's summons to the whisper room had become as routine as the dawn bell, yet each visit layered fresh burdens onto his unyielding memory. The outbuilding, expanded under the guise of a tool shed, now harbored a macabre apothecary's array. Jars of murky fluids, lining shelves hewn from heart pine. Labels scrawled in the master's hurried script denoting preservatives, derived from forbidden recipes. Masterson, his once portly frame thinned by obsessive pursuits, had forged deeper ties with his syndicate, a clandestine circle of planters and a rogue anatomist from Charleston, bound by pacts etched in correspondence that crisscrossed the South like veins. These missives, concealed in hollowed Bible spines, traded not just cotton futures, but insights into vital enhancements, drawing from the dissections to refine the breeding selections. The form reveals the future, Masterson confided during one session, his voice a conspiratorial hush as he gestured to the shrouded arrival, a field hand felled by what the ledgers termed overexertion after resisting a mandated union. Elias, stationed in the flickering lamplight, traced the contours in his mind, the pituitary's diminutive throne regulating hidden rhythms, the thymus's fleeting guardianship over immunity, additions to the 67 that now formed a labyrinthine whole. The weight of these cataloguings pressed inward, intertwining with Elias's recollections of Lila in ways that blurred the boundaries of flesh and spirit. He had reconstructed her decline from shards gathered in the quarters, selected early for the program due to her endurance in the kitchens, reassigned repeatedly to pairings that served the estate's expansion, her quiet defiance manifesting in small acts, delayed labors, murmured incantations to forgotten deities that ultimately led to her isolation and fade. The pacts amplified this cruelty. Masterson bartered anatomical notes on reproductive resilience, gleaned from such cases, to secure favors from allied estates, deeds adjusted by complicit notaries to obscure the lineage of offspring, ensuring the human calculus remained veiled from moral interlopers. Elias overheard fragments during errands to the county seat. Lawyers in smoke-hazed offices drafting clauses that dissolved identities into assets, their ink drying over truths that would moulder in forgotten drawers. In the whisper room, as he recited the lymph nodes' vigilant clusters, he saw Lila's face superimposed, the program's toll, a systemic erasure that the elite's alliances perpetuated with the precision of a well-oiled loom. The community's silence, once a fragile truce, had hardened into an unbreachable fortress, forged by the collective scars of endurance. At twilight gatherings by the river's bend, where the water murmured secrets to the willows, Josiah's tales wove a counter-narrative to the official hush. The elder, his eyes dimming like embers under ash, leaned on a cane carved from swamp driftwood, recounting lineages interrupted by the pacts, ancestors pulled into breeding rotations, their descendants scattered like seeds on barren ground. Stories preserved only in the cadence of work songs, altered to evade the overseer's ears. "They think paper holds the power," Josiah rasped to Elias one evening as fireflies danced in the humid air, "but it's the blood that remembers, the veins they map, carrying what they can't burn." Elias internalized this, his eidetic vault expanding to cradle these oral maps alongside the anatomical. The Vena Cava's grand thoroughfare, now emblematic of the vital flows the program sought to commandeer, laced with accounts of women who had formed covert networks, passing warnings of impending reassignments through coded gestures in the wash lines. Cracks in the plantation's armor widened under the strain of broader tempests. The Kansas-Nebraska Act's ripples reached even this remote corner, carried by circuit preachers who decried the spread of the peculiar institution, igniting furtive debates in the quarters that the overseers quashed with public reprimands. Lashes delivered at the whipping post, vestiges of which lingered in welts that told tales without words. Disappearances escalated, bodies redirected to the whisper room after infractions tied to the breeding demands. A young man who had shielded his sister from a forced pairing, his end logged as escape attempt, though Elias traced the cart's midnight path. In one such vigil, as rain lashed the tin roof, the master and his Charleston ally dissected under ether's haze, Elias's voice steady as he detailed the pericardium's silken enclosure around the heart. The anatomist, a gaunt figure with ink-stained fingers, marveled at the precision, unaware of its source in coerced observation, while Masterson nodded, envisioning a treatise that would immortalize their discoveries under pseudonyms, pacts ensuring shared authorship among the elite. Elias's subtle rebellions deepened, a quiet insurgency etched in the recesses of his role. During recitations, he introduced infinitesimal pauses, allowing the room's echoes to amplify the human residue, the faint sighs of the forms, the distant cries from the isolation cabins. In the fields, he shared veiled insights with trusted kin, describing organ functions in metaphors that doubled as lessons in resilience, the liver's regenerative lobes mirroring the community's unyielding spirit. Masterson, ensnared in his web of alliances, grew lax in scrutiny, his focus shifting to a proposed vault for the journals, a concealed chamber beneath the grand house, designed to safeguard their legacy against abolitionist fires. Elias, tasked with sketching its layout, wove in anomalies, hidden compartments within compartments, places where his own encodings could nestle, the initials of Mira and Lila, concealed in the archway's curves. As summer's peak baked the earth, Josiah's frailty peaked, his final words a benediction delivered in the pre-dawn hush. "Hold the map close, boy. It'll light the way when the chains rust." The elder's passing was swift, attributed to age's toll in the rolls. His body spared the whisper room by Elias's silent intervention, a diversion that bought the old man a shallow grave by the river, unmarked but remembered. The loss carved a hollow in Elias, yet it steeled his resolve, the 67 organs now a living chronicle, not mere biology, but a testament to the breeding pack's betrayals, the silences that smothered communities, the disappearances that fed the elite's delusions. In the quarters, murmurs of his crazy memory shifted from awe to quiet reverence, a spark against the encroaching uniformity. External winds howled louder that autumn, with tales of bloody clashes in distant territories filtering through escaped bondsmen who briefly crossed paths with plantation runners. Masterson convened his syndicate in the library, voices rising behind shuttered windows as they debated fortifications. More overseers, tighter controls on the program to preempt unrest. Elias, lingering in the hall with a tray of untouched brandy, absorbed the fragments. Plans to accelerate pairings, using dissection insights to predict viable outcomes, all veiled in the language of progress. The ciphered journals, swelling toward completion, held the core, Elias's atlas, annotated with theories that twisted humanity into commodities, destined for the vault's embrace. In the solitude of his palate, as cicadas wailed their swan song, Elias traced invisible lines on the rough-hewn wall, the full expanse of his mappings intertwined with the plantation's buried pulse. The persistence of memory, Josiah's legacy, promised that these truths would endure, surfacing in some distant dawn to challenge the veils of forgetting. For now, in the fading light of 1854, the whisper room beckoned once more. But Elias stepped forward with eyes sharpened by purpose, his crazy recall a silent forge against the darkness, hammering out revelations yet to come. The fading embers of 1855 cast long shadows across the plantation, where the cotton stalks, heavy with unripe bolls, bowed under the weight of another season's unyielding demands. Elias, at 20, had transformed into a figure of quiet enigma among the enslaved, his sharp features etched with the lines of burdens too vast for his years. The grand house, its porticos gleaming falsely in the morning light, served as the nerve center for Masterson's escalating intrigues, while the quarters huddled like forgotten footnotes in the margins of the estate's sprawling ledger. The breeding program, that insidious weave of control, tightened its hold as whispers of national fracture grew louder, acts debated in Congress filtering south through coded dispatches, stirring unease among the elites who clung to their pacts like lifelines in a storm. Women were cycled through the isolation cabins with increasing frequency, their reassignments justified as safeguards against the instability of the times, leaving families splintered and the air thick with the residue of unspoken grief. Elias's vigils in the whisper room had assumed a rhythm as inexorable as the tide, each session adding strata to his mental edifice. The outbuilding, now a fortified sanctum disguised amid the tool barns, brimmed with the accumulated detritus of inquiry, shelves sagging under vials of amber-tinted solutions, their contents drawn from alchemical texts that Masterson devoured in feverish solitude. The master, his eyes hollowed by sleepless ambition, had solidified his syndicate into a shadowy fraternity, planters from the Georgia lowlands and a discreet cleric from Mobile, united by vows exchanged in the library's sanctum, promising mutual protection for their shared pursuits. These gatherings unfolded under veils of scholarly pretense, dissecting forms consigned after the breeding program's rigors. A matron whose endurance had finally yielded to the enforced cycles, her departure recorded as decline from natural causes. Elias, ever the silent archivist, committed the revelations to memory. The hypothalamus's subtle command center, orchestrating hungers both physical and profound, the pineal gland's elusive pine cone nestled in the brain's core, elements swelling his catalogue of 67 to a tapestry of intimate defiance against violation. These mappings, born of coercion, resonated with Elias's enduring echo of Lila, whose shadow lengthened in his recollections like kudzu reclaiming a fallow field. He had long since pieced her narrative from the fragments born on the women's hushed breaths, chosen for the program in her prime for her unbowed spirit, subjected to reassignments that methodically eroded her vitality until isolation claimed her in a cabin far from kin. The pacts amplified the betrayal. Masterson traded dissection-derived insights on procreative vitality, notes veiled in jargon to evade ethical scrutiny, with his allies securing endorsements from county officials who redacted records to preserve the illusion of benevolence. Elias glimpsed the machinery during rare forays to town, clerks in dimly lit offices shuffling deeds that anonymized lineages, their pens scratching over the human threads the programs sought to manipulate, ensuring disappearances dissolved into the ether of official amnesia. In the whisper room, as he traced the endometrium's cyclical renewal in his mind, twisted now by the abuses it had witnessed, Elias felt the full measure of complicity, the elite's web, spun from such knowledge, ensnaring generations in cycles of silence. The community's enforced hush had evolved into a profound, resonant quietude, a symphony of restraint that bound the quarters like invisible fetters. At the river's edge, where willows wept into the current, the elders convened in dwindling numbers, their stories a fragile counterpoint to the master's archive. With Josiah's absence a fresh wound, an auntie named Selah took up the mantle, her voice a low cadence, weaving tales of ancestral pacts unraveled by quiet sabotage. Women who had diluted the pairings with whispered lore, passing resilience through bloodlines obscured by the ledgers. The body they carve, Selah confided to Elias one mist-shrouded morn, as they drew water under the overseer's distant gaze, holds more than their knives can claim. It's the vessel of what endures. Elias absorbed her words, layering them onto his atlas, the bone marrow's hidden forge of life, now emblematic of the breeding tolls, intertwined with oral histories of kin who had vanished into swamp pochos after defying the rotations, their fates preserved in the rhythm of field chants, modified to slip past watchful ears. Strains from the wider tumult eroded the plantation's edges, the Kansas strife's echoes reaching even this insulated realm through bondsmen who traded news with passing traders. Masterson, forewarned by his network's tendrils, intensified the controls. Additional patrols along the borders, the breeding program accelerated to bolster the workforce against potential upheaval. Overseers meted out corrections with heightened fervor, public admonishments leaving faint traces of endurance on those who dared linger in fellowship. Disappearances surged, tied to resistances against the pacts. A brother who had confronted an overseer over his siblings' reassignment, his end veiled as fugitive mishap, though Elias marked the cart's nocturnal trail to the whisper room. During one such rite, as autumn winds howled through the cracks, the master and his mobile ally probed under lantern glow, Elias reciting the cochlear's spiral echo chamber with mechanical clarity. The cleric, a sallow man cloaked in false piety, pondered aloud on divine designs in the structures, his notes feeding the syndicate's evolving doctrines, treatises drafted in cipher to justify the programs as ordained progress, destined for dissemination among sympathetic circles. Elias's covert encodings deepened, a subterranean rebellion etched in the folds of his duty. In recitations, he wove pauses pregnant with implication, allowing the room's silences to echo the quarter's muffled laments, the distant keens from isolation cabins, the rustle of leaves concealing furtive plans. Amid the field's drudgery, he disseminated veiled wisdom to Sellers' circle, framing organ lore as parables of fortitude, the spleen's role in purification mirroring the soul's quiet reclamation from the pack's stains. Masterson, entangled in his alliance's intricacies, overlooked these fissures, his attentions fixed on fortifying the vault, a subterranean repository now half dug beneath the house. Its blueprints Elias had subtly altered with concealed niches for his own relics, scraps bearing organ sketches laced with the lost one's sigils, Mira's and Lila's initials curled like protective wards. Winter's grip tightened that year, blanketing the fields in frost that cracked like the facade of Southern unity. Masterson assembled his fraternity in the library, tempers flaring behind drawn drapes as they hashed contingencies, expanding the programs to preempt labor shortages, leveraging dissection insights for predictive breeding, veiled in pseudoscientific veneer. Elias, serving in the antechamber, caught the undercurrents, fractures in the elite's solidarity, hints of betrayals as one planter withheld shares from the common pot. The journals, teeming with Elias's coerced atlas, loomed as the syndicate's holy writ. 67 structures annotated with theories that reduced humanity to mechanisms earmarked for the vault's eternal guardianship. In the hush of his pallet as snow dusted the eaves, Elias contemplated Sellers' counsel, his fingers tracing phantom lines. The atlas's full bloom fused with the plantation's interred agonies, the breeding betrayals, the communal veils, the vanishings that nourished the master's myths. Memory's tenacity, Josiah's bequest, vowed endurance, promising these verities would breach the surface in eras unborn to indict the silences of history. For now, in the brittle chill of 1855, the whisper room summoned anew. Yet Elias advanced with gaze honed by inner fire, his crazy vigilance a muffled thunder against the gathering storm, forging disclosures deferred but inevitable. If this story has gripped you already, leave a like. This helps Elias's story reach more people. The inexorable March of 1856 unfurled across the plantation like a banner frayed at the edges, the cotton fields awakening to another cycle of sowing and subjugation under skies that seemed perpetually bruised. Elias, now 21, navigated the estate's labyrinthine demands with the poise of a shadow elongated by dusk, his presence both indispensable and invisible to those who wielded power. The grand house, its verandas a stage for Masterson's increasingly frantic convocations, thrummed with the undercurrents of a fracturing world, debates over tariffs and territories filtering south like poison in the water table, igniting fears among the elites that their peculiar dominion teetered on the brink. The breeding program, that unyielding scaffold of their legacy, accelerated in response. Women from the quarters herded into isolation with the efficiency of clockwork, their enforced pairings decreed to fortify the labor pool against the spectre of upheaval. Cabins stood emptier, the air laced with the quiet unraveling of kinships as overseers patrolled with rifles slung low, their gazes sweeping for any flicker of dissent. Elias's nights in the whisper room had calcified into a grim liturgy. The outbuilding's confines now a vault of accumulated shadows, its air heavy with the tang of chemicals meant to arrest decay. Masterson, his features gaunt from ceaseless vigilance over his ciphered empire, had woven his syndicate into a tighter knot, planters from the Carolina borders and a shadowy investor from New Orleans, their pacts renewed in blood oath ceremonies veiled as hunting retreats. These alliances traded not merely cotton, but the fruits of the dissections, insights into endurance thresholds drawn from the forms that arrived after the program's tolls, a resilient field hand whose spirit had buckled under repeated reassignments, his passing inscribed in the ledgers as weariness of the flesh. Elias, rooted in the corner like an ancient oak, etched the details into his unassailable memory. The parathyroid's subtle regulators of bone and blood, the lacrimal glands, hidden wells of sorrow. Final pieces completing the 67, a forbidden cartography that mapped not just anatomy, but the body's quiet rebellions against imposed fates. These visions bled into Elias's core, merging with the spectral presence of Lila, whose memory had become the Atlas's unspoken spine. He had long assembled her story from the mosaic of whispers in the washyards, plucked for the program in her youth, for her steadfast grace, cycled through unions that methodically hollowed her resolve until a final isolation left her adrift in silence, her essence fading like mist over the fields. The pacts extended the shadow. Masterson bartered notes on glandular fortitudes, veiled annotations from the whisper room to clinch favors, from adjusted tax rolls by county allies to forged certificates obscuring the origins of program-born children, ensuring the human machinery churned unseen. Elias caught echoes during supply runs to the crossroads. Notaries in lantern-lit backrooms sealing documents that buried lineages in legalese, their complicity a thread in the elite's grand tapestry of denial. In the room's hush, as he recited the olfactory bulb's delicate senses of the world, he envisioned Lila's final breaths, the program's relentless erosion, a betrayal amplified by alliances that treated souls as arable soil. The quarter's silence had transcended mere restraint, evolving into a profound, echoing void that cradled the community's resilience like a hidden root system. By the riverbanks, where the current carved secrets into the clay, Selah and the remaining elders gathered in veiled circles, their narratives a bulwark against oblivion. With Josiah's wisdom now legend, Selah's voice carried the weight, recounting disrupted bloodlines from the pacts. Ancestors vanished into enforced isolations, their descendants marked by unspoken inheritances, preserved in the subtle inflections of lullabies sung to evade the patrols. "They slice to own," Selah murmured to Elias one dew-kissed dawn, her hands gnarled as river roots, "but the scars tell the tale they can't silence." Elias wove her counsel into his vault. The cornea's transparent shields, now symbols of the veiled gazes in the cabins, interlaced with lore of women who had forged clandestine signals. Knotted cloths on lines, warning of impending summonses, acts of persistence blooming in the cracks of control. The plantation's fissures deepened as the national storm gathered force. The caning of Sumner in the Senate, reaching even this remote hollow through escaped whispers from town. Masterson, his network straining under suspicions of spies, redoubled the safeguards, barbed fences along the swamps, the breeding rotations intensified to swell the ranks, drawing families into orbits of coerced continuity. Corrections grew swifter. Public reckonings at the post, leaving subtle imprints of defiance on those who shielded kin from the demands. Vanishings crested, linked to the pact's pressures. A sister who had confronted her reassignment, her trail lost to a nocturnal flight, though Elias followed the cart's silhouette to the whisper room's maw. In that vigil, as thunder rolled distant preludes, the master and his New Orleans patron incised under sputtering lamps, Elias voicing the retina's intricate mosaic with unflinching cadence. The investor, a silk-clad figure with calculating eyes, speculated on commercial applications, extracts for vital tonics to sustain the programs, his jottings fueling the syndicate's dreams of perpetuity, treatises ciphered for covert circulation among the faithful. Elias's encodings matured into a subtle insurrection, pauses in his recitations conjuring the quarter's latent anthems, the faint harmonies from isolation thresholds, the rustle of plans hatched in the underbrush. In the field's monotony, he imparted parables to Sellers' kin, organ functions as metaphors for endurance. The alveoli's fragile exchanges mirroring breaths stolen yet reclaimed from the pack's grasp. Masterson, mired in alliance machinations, missed these undercurrents, his zeal bent on the vault's completion, a labyrinthine chamber beneath the house. Its plans Elias had laced with secret alcoves for his relics, tattered sketches of the Atlas, infused with sigils of the departed, Leela's and Mira's forms etched in defiant script. As 1861's tempests broke, the war's roar shattered the South's illusions, Union lines creeping southward like vindication's tide. Masterson fled with his core ledgers to kin in the hills, the plantation falling to federal hands amid the quarter's cautious jubilation. Elias, freed at last, vanished into the Reconstruction's chaos. His atlas carried not on paper, but in the indelible forge of memory, a crazy legacy whispered among descendants as he sought traces of Lila's kin in the fractured aftermath. Over a century later, in the humid hush of a 2023 excavation on the overgrown site of what locals still called the House of Shadows, a team of archaeologists unearthed a concealed root cellar flooded by decades of rains. Amid rusted tools and shattered jars lay a bundle of mildewed pages, sketches of 67 organs, rendered with preternatural accuracy, predating X-rays by generations. Historians, piecing the fragments with oral histories from Elias's lineage, traced them to the enslaved boy's coerced genius, revelations spilling from a great-great-niece's confessions, tales of the breeding pacts, the whisper room's silences, the elite's complicit veils that official records had long interred. Osadas, in a nearby pocho, bearing vestiges of the program's hidden tolls, corroborated the accounts, forcing a reckoning in county archives once sealed by sympathetic hands. In this tardy unveiling, memory triumphs over forgetting, the persistence of one boy's recall piercing the shroud of institutional denial, granting voice to the silenced and a measure of justice to the uprooted. The scars endure, but so does the light they cast on history's buried yet unvanquished. Subscribe to the channel to discover more forbidden and forgotten stories. Thank you for following the story of Elias at the House of Shadows. See you in the next video.